My husband and his father lived off me for 4 years, spending $4,000 a month, but when I refused to give him $3,000 for a car, my father-in-law pushed me down the stairs and my husband blamed me. I'm 32 years old. I work in accounting for a mid-sized firm, and what happened 6 months ago basically made me realize I'd been living a lie for 4 complete years. 4 years. Can you believe it? 4 years where I was the only person in my house making money, paying the bills, keeping everything running, while my husband David and my father-in-law Robert did absolutely nothing except spend what I earned. And the thing is, I didn't realize how bad everything was until my father-in-law literally pushed me down the stairs because I refused to give him money for a car. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning, because this story is long and complicated, and I need to tell it completely for it to make sense. I met David like 7 years ago, when I was 25 and he was 28, I think. We met at a work networking event, one of those boring ones where everyone pretends to be interested in what others do but really just wants to go home. David worked in sales at the time. He didn't make a ton, but it wasn't bad either, and he seemed like a normal guy, someone with goals and ambitions. His father, Robert, lived alone in an apartment on the other side of town. They'd had a somewhat distant relationship for years, but nothing too dramatic. We got married after 2 years of dating. It was a small wedding, nothing fancy, but nice. And at first, everything was fine. I mean, we had the normal problems any couple has, but nothing serious. Nothing that made me think things would end up how they ended up. The problem started like 4.5 years ago, when Robert lost his job. He worked in construction. He was like 58 years old at the time, and the company he worked for closed or laid off a bunch of people. I don't remember exactly what happened. David told me his father was going through a rough time, that he couldn't pay rent on his apartment, that he needed help temporarily. I said yes, obviously, because that's what family does, right? Help each other when things get tough. We told him to move in with us for a few months while he found another job. We bought a house together, David and I. Well, technically I bought it because I had better credit and could qualify for the mortgage, but it was our house. Or so I thought. So Robert moved in, and the first few months were weird but manageable. He slept in the guest room. I kept working my 8 hours a day, plus overtime when I could, and David was supposedly looking for better job opportunities because he wasn't happy with his sales job. Robert wasn't getting anything either. He said he was applying to jobs, but nobody was calling him, that he was too old, that the economy was bad. And I believed him. Honestly, because it is hard to find work when you're almost 60. I understand that. But then 6 months passed, and then a year, and neither of them had jobs. David left his sales job because, according to him, it was too stressful and they didn't pay him enough, and I thought, okay, he can take some time to find something better. I can keep things going in the meantime. But that time never came. David never found another job. He didn't even really try. Now that I think about it, he spent all day at home, playing video games, watching Netflix, saying he was sending out resumes, but I never saw real evidence of that. And Robert the same, he spent all his time sitting on the couch watching television or complaining about everything. And I kept working, paying the mortgage, which was $1,800 a month, plus utilities, which were like $300, plus food, which was easily $800 a month for 3 people, plus internet and cable, plus car expenses, plus everything else. I was spending basically my entire salary maintaining a house where I was the only one working, and those two didn't even have the decency to help with household chores or cooking or something. I'd come home from work tired and the house was a mess, dirty dishes in the sink, clothes thrown everywhere, and them sitting there, like nothing. And the worst part is, they started asking for more things. Robert wanted money for cigarettes, for beer, to go out with his friends. David wanted me to buy him new clothes, to pay for the gym he never went to give him money to go out. And I, like an idiot, gave it to them because I thought it was my duty as a wife and daughter-in-law. Because they'd put it in my head that family helps each other, that I had the ability to support them, so I should do it. My bank account was practically at zero at the end of each month. I had no savings. I couldn't buy anything for myself, and them living like kings on my money. I calculated later with my lawyer that I was spending like $4,000 a month on everything, and that's not counting the extra things they constantly asked me for. This went on like this for 4 years. 4 years of my life working like a mule to support 2 adult men, perfectly capable of working, who simply decided it was easier to live off me, and I started to resent them, obviously. But I also felt guilty for resenting them because, you know, he's my husband. He's my family. I'm supposed to love and support them. But every time I tried to talk to David about how his father needed to look for work or move out, he got defensive, said I was selfish. How could I throw his father out on the street? That he was old and sick, though he didn't have anything really serious, just excuses. And every time I told David he needed to contribute financially somehow, he got angry, said I didn't support him, that I was being unfair, that the job market was tough. It was always my fault somehow. I was always the bad guy in the story. So we get to 6 months ago, to the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning. I had just gotten back from the grocery store where I'd spent $200 on food for the week, and I was putting everything away in the kitchen when Robert came in. He told me he needed to talk to me about something important. I thought he was finally going to tell me he'd found a job, or that he was moving out, or something positive. But no. He told me he needed $3,000 to buy himself a car. Just like that, like nothing. Like $3,000 was $20. I asked him why he needed a car if he didn't work and had nowhere to go, and he told me he needed it to be able to look for work more easily, that public transportation was inconvenient, and I just exploded. I told him no, that I was already paying $4,000 a month to support him and David, that I didn't have an extra $3,000 lying around, that if he wanted a car, he'd have to get a job and buy it himself. And he got furious. Like his face turned red and he started yelling that I was ungrateful, that he was family. How dare I deny him something after everything he'd done for me, which was literally nothing but whatever. David appeared because he heard the yelling, and instead of supporting me, he looked at me and told me I was being unreasonable, that $3,000 wasn't that much money, that his father needed it. And I told them no. Absolutely not. That this was over. That I wasn't going to keep supporting two adults who did nothing to help themselves anymore. Robert approached me. We were in the kitchen near the door that leads to the basement stairs, and he pointed his finger in my face saying I had no right to talk to him like that this was his house too, that he was staying with or without my permission. I told him the house was in my name, that he wasn't paying anything, that technically it was my property. And then, and I still can't believe this when I think about it, he pushed me. He pushed me hard, with both hands on my chest, and I lost my balance and fell down the basement stairs. I didn't roll down all the steps. It was like 5 or 6 before I could grab the railing, but I still hit my back, my elbow, my hip. Everything hurt. I sat there in the middle of the stairs, in total shock, unable to process what had just happened. David came down the stairs, and I thought he was going to help me, that he was going to yell at his father, that he was going to do something. But what he said to me was, "Why did you have to provoke him? Why couldn't you just give him the money and avoid all this drama?" As if it was my fault that his father had just physically assaulted me. Robert was upstairs yelling that I deserved it for being disrespectful, that I should learn to respect my elders. And I realized in that moment, sitting there on the stairs with my body aching and my husband blaming me for what his father had just done to me, that I had to leave. That if I stayed one more day in that house, I was going to end up much worse. Or I was going to completely lose my dignity. Or both. I got up, went up the stairs, ignoring the pain, walked past Robert without looking at him, went to my room and started packing. I pulled a large suitcase out of the closet and threw in clothes. Important documents, my laptop, everything I could carry. David followed me around the room, asking what I was doing, telling me I was exaggerating, that his father hadn't pushed me that hard, that it had just been an accident. An accident. Can you believe it? Like you accidentally pushed someone down the stairs. I told him to leave, that I didn't want to talk to him, that our relationship was over. He started getting nervous then, saying not to leave, that we could work this out, but I'd already made my decision. I left the house with my suitcase, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there. I ended up at a cheap motel like 20 minutes away, paid for a week with my credit card, which was already almost at the limit, and locked myself in the room. I sat on the bed and cried. Cried like I hadn't cried in years. Because my marriage was over. Because I'd wasted 4 years of my life. Because I'd let myself be treated like that. Because my whole body hurt. Because I didn't know what I was going to do now. David sent me, like 50 messages that night, some apologizing, others angry, others trying to manipulate me into coming back. I ignored them all. The next day, Monday, I called my work and said I was sick. I Googled family law attorneys in my area and found Rebecca, who had good reviews and offered free consultations. I went to her office that same afternoon and told her everything. Absolutely everything, from the beginning to the push down the stairs. She listened to everything without interrupting, taking notes. And when I finished, she told me I had a very solid case for divorce, for a restraining order against Robert, and for a civil lawsuit for assault, and for the money I'd spent supporting them for 4 years. She explained it was going to be a long and probably painful process, but that I had all the rights on my side and that she was going to help me. The first thing we did was collect evidence. I printed all my bank statements from the last 4 years, showing every mortgage payment, every grocery purchase, every expense I'd made. I gathered all the receipts I had saved. I took screenshots of text messages where David and Robert constantly asked me for money. Rebecca helped me document the injuries from the push. I went to the doctor and got a medical report showing the bruises and back pain. I had a whole folder full of evidence of what I'd been living through. Meanwhile, I was still at the motel, but I looked for a small apartment to rent. I found a 1-bedroom that was within my budget, signed the contract, and started moving little by little. One day when I knew David and Robert weren't at the house, David had sent me a message saying they were going out, probably thinking I'd come back if they weren't there. I went with a friend from work and took out all my important things: my furniture, my clothes, my books, everything. I left the bare minimum so the house wouldn't look completely empty, but I took everything that was mine. Rebecca prepared all the legal papers, the divorce petition, the eviction papers because the house was in my name and they were technically tenants without a contract or payments, and the civil lawsuit against Robert for assault and economic damages. We calculated that Robert owed me like $80,000 in accumulated expenses from 4 years, though Rebecca told me I probably wouldn't recover all of it, but we were going to try anyway. The day came when we had to deliver the papers, and Rebecca hired a legal process server to deliver them in person. I wasn't there when they were delivered, but Rebecca told me later that Robert opened the door. The server explained what the documents were, and Robert literally tore them up in his face and told him to leave, that he wasn't going to read that nonsense, that that house was as much his as mine and he didn't have to go anywhere. The server explained to him that tearing up the papers didn't make them any less valid, that they were already legally notified, and left. David sent me like 100 messages that day, calling me everything, saying how could I do this to them, that I was a traitor, that I was destroying the family. I responded only once, telling him that he had destroyed our family by choosing his abusive father over his wife, and then I blocked him. Like 2 weeks passed of the legal notification period, and they hadn't moved from the house. Rebecca had warned me they probably wouldn't leave voluntarily, so we already had the next step prepared. She contacted the local sheriff and scheduled a forced eviction order. The day came. I went because Rebecca told me it was my right to be present since it was my property, and I arrived with Rebecca just as the sheriff knocked on the door. David opened. He looked terrible, honestly, like he hadn't showered in days, and he froze when he saw me. The sheriff explained they had 1 hour to gather their essential belongings and leave the property, and that anything they left could be picked up later under supervision. But they had to leave now. Robert appeared behind David, yelling that this was illegal, that they couldn't evict him, that he had rights. The sheriff very calmly told him no, he had no rights because he wasn't paying rent, had no contract, and the property owner had legally requested his eviction. Robert tried to push the sheriff, which was the stupidest thing he could do, and almost got arrested right there. The sheriff warned him that if he put another finger on him or anyone present, he was going to spend the night in jail. I stood there while they packed, and David approached me at one point. He said to me, "Are you really going to do this? Are you going to destroy your family over money?" And I told him something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I told him, family doesn't push you down the stairs. Family doesn't exploit you financially for 4 years. Family doesn't tell you that you deserved it when they hurt you. You were never my family, David. You were just someone who found an easy way to live without working, and I was stupid enough to allow it. He went quiet, didn't know what to say, and went back to packing his things. An hour later, they were outside with their suitcases, Robert still yelling threats that he was going to sue me, that he was going to ruin my life, that I'd regret this. David just looked defeated, tired, like he'd finally realized he'd ruined everything. They got in a taxi. I don't know where they went, and honestly, I don't care. And the sheriff handed me the keys to my own house. Rebecca had brought a locksmith who changed all the locks immediately, So even if they had copies of the old keys, they no longer worked. I entered my house for the first time in weeks, and it was a total mess. Garbage everywhere, dirty dishes, the place stank. They'd left food rotting in the kitchen. I spent the whole weekend cleaning, throwing things away, disinfecting everything. It was exhausting, but also therapeutic somehow, like I was cleaning not just the house, but that whole horrible stage of my life. Even though technically the house was mine again, I decided I didn't want to stay there. There were too many bad memories, so I hired a real estate agency to put it on the market. The following months were a long legal process. The divorce with David was relatively simple because we had no children, and I could prove he hadn't contributed anything for years, so he had no right to any of my assets. The eviction thing was already resolved. But the civil lawsuit against Robert was more complicated. He hired a lawyer. Well, more like a cheap lawyer they assigned him or something, and they tried to argue that I had been the aggressor, that he had only defended himself. But Rebecca presented all the evidence, the bank statements, the medical report, the testimonies, everything. The judge believed Rebecca, obviously, because the evidence was overwhelming. The case took like 4 months to fully resolve, with hearings and more documents and all. That legal bureaucracy, that's exhausting. But in the end, the judge ordered Robert to pay $35,000 in damages, which wasn't what we'd asked for, but it was something, plus medical costs and legal fees. Rebecca told me I'd probably never see that money because Robert had nothing. No job, no savings, nothing. But at least it was legally on record that he owed me and that he'd been found guilty of assault and economic exploitation. And that was enough for me. I didn't need the money as much as I needed the validation that what had happened to me was real and that I wasn't crazy or exaggerating. During all this time, I focused on rebuilding my life. I kept working, but I also started doing things for myself for the first time in years. I joined a gym and actually went, took yoga classes, went out with friends. I'd stopped seeing because David always made excuses for me not to go out. I went to therapy too, because Rebecca recommended it, and honestly, it helped me a lot to process everything I'd lived through. To understand it hadn't been my fault, that I'd been a victim of economic and emotional abuse, and that it was okay to feel anger and sadness and relief all at the same time. The house sold after like 3 months on the market. I got a decent price considering the area and the condition it was in. With the money from the sale, I paid off all my credit card debts I'd accumulated over the last few years, paid Rebecca the rest of her fees because she deserved every penny, and was able to put a good deposit on a better apartment in a nicer area of the city. For the first time in 4 years, my bank account had a positive balance at the end of the month. I could save money. I could buy myself things without feeling guilty. I could simply breathe. David tried to contact me a few times after everything was over, messages saying he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that he wanted another chance. I never responded. I simply blocked each new number or account he wrote to me from. I found out through mutual acquaintances that he finally got a job, something in retail or customer service, something basic, and that Robert was living with him in a small apartment. I guess when they didn't have someone to support them, they finally had to fend for themselves. How ironic. Like 2 weeks ago, I was at a coffee shop near my new apartment, working on my laptop because I like to change environments sometimes, and I saw David come in. He didn't see me at first. He was standing in line to order, and I considered leaving before he noticed me, but I decided to stay. Eventually he saw me, froze for a second, and then walked toward my table. He asked if we could talk. I told him there was nothing to talk about, but if he wanted to say something quickly, go ahead. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about everything that happened, that he finally understood how selfish he'd been, how blind he was, and that if he could turn back time, he'd do everything differently. I told him that was nice, but it didn't change anything, that the damage was done and I'd moved on. He asked if I could ever forgive him, and I told him honestly I didn't know. That maybe someday, but definitely not now. And that even if I forgave him, that didn't mean I wanted to have any kind of relationship with him again. He looked sad, accepted what I told him, and left. I haven't heard from him since. My life now is completely different. And I mean completely. I live alone in an apartment I love, in a safe and quiet neighborhood. I have plants. Can you believe it? I never had plants before because Robert was allergic or said he was. Probably a lie. I have like 6 different plants and none have died yet, which I consider an achievement. I got a promotion at work 2 months ago. because I finally had the mental energy to focus on my career instead of worrying about how I was going to pay the bills that month. I'm saving up to take a trip to Europe next year, something I always wanted to do but never could because all my money went to supporting two adult men. I go on dates occasionally. Nothing serious yet because, honestly, I'm not ready for a serious relationship. But it's nice to feel valued. To feel like someone is genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person and not just as a source of income. My friends tell me I look different now. Happier, more relaxed. And they're right. For the first time in years, I feel like myself. Like the person I was before I met David. But stronger, wiser, with better boundaries. Do I regret going through all that? Not exactly regret, because I can't change the past. But I do wish I'd had the courage to leave much earlier, to have set boundaries from the beginning, to not have allowed myself to be treated like that for so long. But I also learned a lot about myself, about my strength, about what I'm willing to tolerate, and what I'm not. And I learned that sometimes family isn't the people you share blood with or who you marry, but the people who really support you, respect you, and value you. And I'm building that family now, with friends who became brothers, with colleagues who became mentors, with a support network that really cares about me, and I care about them. The last time I drove through the neighborhood where my old house was, I saw that the new owners had painted the facade a different color and fixed the yard that was always neglected. It looked nice, like a place where happy people live, and I was glad for them. That house has a new story now, a better one, and so do I.